tonight with a bit of a boxing gem. This one came out of the blue a few weeks ago, and I chased it up, grabbed hold of the two books, and I've read one of them. I haven't read the second one. Now, the second one, or the first of the books, the second one that I'm going to read is about a guy called Dick Tiger. Now, Dick Tiger I was always a fan of Dick Tiger. Obviously, I never saw him fight in the flesh, but I can always remember watching his fights, or the two or three I'd seen, especially the one he lost, the only time he ever got knocked out, so that's not particularly good. But I'd also calculated that he was at least 39 or 40, probably even older. But what really struck me in this classic piece of old colour film at Madison Square Garden on the first night of the new garden, or some sort of deal like that, it was a great big night, was that he had on his robe, a big robe. Of course, he wasn't even that big, he seemed big. Wasn't that tall, but had on the back Biafra, not Nigerian. It always struck me. It's an intriguing piece of history. Anyway, the guy that wrote that then got interested in the life of a guy called Frankie DePaula. Now, again, you might have to Google and do some searches. And this guy, his life was very, very entertaining. Now, I knew about DePaula. I knew about the whole mob involvement. I didn't know about it, but I'd heard about it. That's why we're talking about the book in a few moments. Anyway, DePaula and this guy and Dick Tiger they fought each other, and they actually got Ring Fight of the Year. Now it's a real rare thing that Ring Fight of the Year isn't involved with a title. In fact, I might do a little bit of research on that, because I would imagine we're talking very, very low numbers, because generally it's a title fight of some description. Anyway, they were involved in a major fight. They're both down a couple of times. We'll talk to the author in a minute. He'll give us the exact details. And then this guy Frankie DePaula managed to get a title fight against the great Bob Foster, and he got done in a round in this fight, but he maybe didn't get clipped with a proper shot, or perhaps it's not for us to say whether he got clipped with a proper shot, but what he did get is clipped very soon after that, and he got shot, and then he died. But he didn't die suddenly, and I didn't notice. He wasted away in prison, and there's an amazing there's amazing turns and twists in the book. The book's called Jersey Boy, The Life and Mob Slaying of Frankie DePaula, by Adeyinka Makinde, who I'm delighted to say is in the studio with me now. Adi, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Steve.
We'll talk about, if we can, we'll talk about the Jersey Boy book, The Life and Mob Slaying of Frankie DePaula first, and then we'll talk a bit about Dick Tiger, if we can. Now, what inspired you to write the DePaula book? Was it just the fact that he came up when you were doing the Dick Tiger research?
A little bit more than that. I mean, I'd read about him in Boxing Babylon, which was a
Nigel Collins book.
That's right, some years ago, and I think I read it as a serialization in Bert Sugar's Boxing Illustrated. So that kept, was in my mind, and then his name came up in my research of Dick Tiger. Mm-hmm. They fought this amazing battle at Madison Square Garden. They were both on the floor, on the canvas, twice apiece. Amazing, hellacious fight. And so again, when I had the Dick Tiger website going on, I had a special section for that
for DePaula.
Absolutely. It was an amazing bout. And after the book was released, DePaula's son discovered that and got in touch with me. Told me he'd like me to write a book about his father. I said, oh, hang on, I can't do that. But died when he was 30 years old. What am I going to do about that?
And of course, the thing is, Aid, is that you were born in Nigeria, or
yes.
So you're Nigerian.
Yes.
Dick Tiger was a Nigerian stroke Biafran, depending on what time in history we're talking about it.
Yep.
Because he was most definitely a Biafran at that time, and he's
yes.
a Nigerian in the general scheme of things.
Yes.
But Frankie DePaula is certainly not a Nigerian. He certainly wasn't born in. He certainly wasn't raised in Liverpool or in London like you and like Dick Tiger were.
Yeah.
And he was, so it was a bit of a cultural step to start tracking down Frankie DePaula's history.
Yeah, I suppose so. I was speaking to the son of one of the mob guys I mentioned in the book.
Oh,
James Napoli.
Yes. Joey Knapp.
Jimmy Knapp.
Jimmy Knapp. Oh,
yeah.
Fantastic.
What a character. I don't know if you have any kind of character like that in your book.
I've only got characters like that in my book.
Right. Well, Jimmy Knapp was the guy I would say who was there between Frankie Carbo, Blinky Palermo, you know, in the
In the
time when
50s
they
and
had
stuff.
the IBC,
Alcatraz. And
yeah,
all that, yep.
and the coming of Don King and Bob Arum. I would say he was that kind of he was the guy in the interim period
That made it happen. You needed to go through Jimmy Knapp to get anywhere.
Exactly.
And Frankie was very involved. Or was he very involved? Did we just assume he was involved because he was DePaula?
He was an associate. He did hang around mobsters. He started like Rocky, the fictional character.
Yeah, this is interesting.
He started, he was a mob collector. You know, he used to go and collect
for the mob.
Absolutely, you know, gambling debts and all the sorts of tithes. You know, local business people would have to pay to a mafia don
to keep going. But he
Absolutely.
now, as a fighter, he was, you know, was obviously brave and he was tough, but he didn't train very hard, or sometimes he didn't train at all. But he did have a following, and he could bang, he could punch.
Absolutely. I mean, that was his main strength. You know, he was what they call a banger.
Yeah.
You know, and he started off basically as a street fighter, which comes in handy if you're going to be a bouncer.
Yeah, of course.
In a hard area like
and an enforcer.
Absolutely. You know, I talked to a lot of British people from that generation, and you know, they've read the book, or even before they read the book, and I tell them stories like Frankie DePaula, and they say, "Oh, blimey, thank goodness I'm not there." I mean, these guys are way harder than what's down there at the East End, mate. You know,
yeah, they were that whole period there in North Jersey, that whole Jersey City into Hoboken, obviously where Sinatra was from.
Yeah.
Because Sinatra was a friend, too strong a word, associate, knew him.
Yeah, definitely knew him. Definitely came to his fights. You know, we talk about Jimmy Knapp. We talk about Frank Sinatra. All these people come from the same neighborhood. And I must say, when we talk about mob involvement, of which there was no doubt that it took place, and there's no doubt in the book that Frankie DePaula was involved with them, you've got to also think on the level that, you know, the Italian Americans, like the Irish Americans, Jewish Americans, you know, they were into boxing. You know, he would have come from a generation, Jimmy Knapp, when, you know, you had neighborhood champions.
Sure.
You know, before you got up to world champions.
And you went over to watch them fight wherever they were fighting.
So they were fans to start with. And Sinatra was definitely a big boxing fan, and I'm sure you know about how he helped guys like Joe Louis and Sugar Ray Robinson financially.
He did, and lots of things that Frank Sinatra. I'd love to read a really good Frank Sinatra book one day, a really good one instead of the sort of usual stuff. Now, so Frankie DePaula has this incredible fight with Dick Tiger, who at the time is, you know, he's already established as a great fighter. But let's say he's already won. He's won the middleweight, and he's about to win the light heavyweight.
No, he's recently been dethroned by Bob Foster.
Okay, so
earlier in '68.
Okay, so he fights him after he loses to Bob Foster.
That's right.
But he's won his middleweight title. He's won his light heavyweight world title after this improbable. We'll talk about Dick Tiger in a moment in detail. After this improbable start, and it's the most unbelievable piece of British boxing history that's really undiscovered, and it's the influx of West African fighters and Jamaican fighters in the 50s. I've been working on this and pitching this and talking to people like this for about 10 years. A great period. That 50s period is a great period. And I'll tell you why, because my father was an amateur boxer, and he trained at St Pancras in North London. And they used to go to a gym in Fitzroy Square, and inside this gym, it was known as a black gym. In fact, back then it was known as a coloured gym.
Right.
And in this gym, there were always Africans and Jamaicans, always in this gym. And my dad used to go down there and train sometimes because it was decent sparring. It was close to where he lived, as opposed to the gym, which was a little bit further away. And I've always been fascinated by that. By 1960, 61, there being a gym in central London packed full of West Indian immigrant fighters and African fighters, and that's what Dick Tiger did. But we'll go on to that in a minute.